Actually employed through Voices of Hope, and that's our local crisis center here in Lincoln, and we work with victims and survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault and stalking, and really other related forms of abuse. We work with like adult survivors of child abuse. And then the university contracts with our agency to have an advocate on campus. So really all of the core services that we offer at Voices of Hope, things like crisis counseling, advocacy, support, referrals, I do that on campus. Mostly with students, but it's also a service available for faculty and staff as well. And then I also do a lot of prevention work. So most of our agency does intervention work, which is important and necessary, but I'm interested in having conversations about preventing violence. And so a lot of my work is with students, middle, high school, college age, about having conversations about preventing relationship and sexual violence. So a lot around consent and healthy relationships and respect and things like that. Honestly, I think there's so many barriers and obstacles for victims and survivors of whether it's sexual assault or relationship violence. When I think particularly about sexual assault, I think even though we've done a better job about raising awareness and having conversations, there's still this layer of embarrassment and guilt and shame, which are deeply tied to, I think, the victim-blaming myths that we have out there about sexual assault. Well, what was she wearing? Was she drinking? Was she sending the wrong message? You know, all of these things that, you know, in my opinion, is totally irrelevant. You know, that if somebody doesn't provide consent, I don't care what they're wearing or what they're doing or what their reputation is or how much they were drinking, that is irrelevant. Everyone gets to decide what they do with their body. They have agency and control over that and should, and people have to respect those boundaries. But because those misconceptions are so prevalent, that influences the way we think about sexual violence and creates a lot of barriers for the victim in terms of getting help. Whether that's making a report to law enforcement, reaching out to Title IX, or even to a crisis center. That first step is so difficult, and I think they're guided by how society views these types of crimes, unfortunately. More so than ever before, we have education about these types of issues. You know, Prevent, which is a student-based organization that does bystander intervention work, I mean, they're busier than ever before. So we're providing a lot of education and saturation, if you will, on campus about these topics, which is so important. And so I think this has been playing out and just improving throughout this past year. I've seen some real great changes happening on campus, making this a top priority and addressing student needs. We've been doing this work in Lincoln for 40 years. And actually, this was an organization that started at UNL. There was a series of sexual assaults that happened on campus in the early 70s, and some student activists realized there was nothing in place to support victims of these crimes. I mean, and you think, I mean, we have victim blaming and misconceptions today, but those were way stronger, you know, a couple of decades ago. I mean, they were really fighting an uphill battle, and so they actually started a crisis line on campus, a group of concerned students wanting to make sure that survivors had a confidential advocate there to listen and help them during this process. And so that's how our crisis line started. That's one of the core services that we provide at Voices. It's a 24-hour hotline where you can always reach an advocate no matter the day or time, which is pretty phenomenal because it's our only you know, violence-related hotline that we have here in Lancaster County. So that started at UNL. So I always say students have a lot of power when it comes to, you know, organizing and implementing change.